All right, hello. So we're back for essentially part two of the depth of field lecture. We talked about the technical, so you should have a good understanding of how adjusting the aperture actually does also then affect uh, the visual sensation of the image in terms of focus. So how adjusting the aperture can change the focus, either having one thing in focus and very much in blur, or the opposite of having almost everything very clear. Both are very valuable in photography, but I think really change the overall viewing experience of the image. So it's important to know how to do that and to know how to manipulate that based on your own preference. All right, so I'll go ahead and share screen here. And again, this is part two. So we ended up last time talking about the Unit 2 exercise depth of field. So if you've completed that, then you know how to manipulate your camera based on the same scene by creating either a very shallow depth of field or a very deep depth of field. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about the next project, which is called Photography Fast and Slow. So this is going to be our next project, which means, again, this is a project that is worth significantly more points and will be graded based on that grading criteria rather than the pass-fail of the exercises. Okay, so I'll actually end that and I'll show you the assignment itself, and let's just go ahead and read through that together. All right. So, photography fast and slow. Again, this is project 2. The requirements of this project are primarily technical. So, this is really you understanding how to manipulate that equivalent exposure value and how to manipulate your aperture and your depth of field. That's going to be first and foremost what I would like you to display. But again, it should have a concept and it could have a theme. Photography is meant to be a voice to whatever message you would like to send, whatever story you would like to tell. The subject matter and concept should correspond to the theme of memory. So that's just kind of the overall broad theme that I would like you to explore as you're thinking about this project in particular. What is memory? Could be a lot of things. It could be trauma. It could be a dreamscape. So it could be either negative associations that you have about memory. It could be very positive memories. It could be your childhood. It could be happiness. It could be sort of an honorarium of some sort of loss that you have had. Or it could be just an exploration of memory and how photography is this phenomenon that kind of freezes time. Maybe you're thinking about it very conceptually in that sensation of freezing little snippets of time or recording lost things to, this documentation of photography. It could be many different things. So I want you to kind of take this theme of memory, take that word, and then really just roll with it to kind of filter that through your own introspection and through these technical requirements. So this is photography fast and slow. So you'll be turning in a set of slow photographs and a set of fast photographs, but they should connect in theme. They shouldn't be two totally separate projects. They should be two different ways of looking at the same idea of memory. So slow photography, these images will be shot in a medium to low light environment. This lighting will require long exposure times. Shutter speed roughly less than 60. So what does that mean? That means below the threshold of 60. Why is 60 relevant? You may remember from past lectures we talked about 60 is the threshold of hand holding. So below that, what does that mean? You can't hand hold your camera. So you will need to either use a tripod or have some sort of stand. I remember way back in the day when I was doing high school and undergrad photography and I couldn't afford a tripod, I would have a stack of books. I would have like these crazy contraptions with string holding up my camera on a stack of different things. If you don't have the money for a tripod, look at rental situations or look at kind of crafting a tripod out of the environment that is around you. You can certainly just set your camera on something and it will work as if it's a tripod. The limitations of hand holding is because your body will move. You'll breathe, your arms will slightly move up and down. No one can stay static like a statue. So you will get some blur in your photographs if you're less than 1/60th of a second in your shutter speed. You may choose blur and movement. So if you don't have a tripod, you could integrate blur and movement into the concept. Now, you cannot just rely on that or fall back on that if you don't have the technical skills to make it clear, but if it lends towards the image that you're trying to create and if it lends towards your concept, maybe movement and blur is helpful in your image. And we'll talk about a couple of examples of where photographers have used that very intentionally. Because 1/60th of a second is the maximum speed in which you can effectively shoot handheld, you will want to use a tripod stapling device. We just talked about that. Great. Slow can additionally be used conceptually in either planned or very meticulous thoughts, long studies of something, or a methodical studio setting in which you really kind of craft the scene. So slow primarily is technical. I want you to hit those technical points, but slow could also be conceptual. Maybe take that and run with it in ways that you can be slower in your shooting process as well. Alternatively, fast photography. These images will be shot in a medium to high lighting environment. This lighting will require short exposure times, shutter speed roughly higher than 1/60th of a second. These images should have crisp, clear focus, and there are potential for more candid situational shots. So when you're shooting very quickly, that means you could shoot traffic, people in movement, water, objects in movement. It opens up the amount of things that you can photograph there. So again, this is a project, so it will be graded upon the criteria that's stated in the syllabus. So that's going to be number 1, workflow. Essentially, are you using your time appropriately, creating a project that is appropriately challenging, and are you completing the objectives outlined? So are you hitting all these technical points? Craftsmanship. Do you have correct exposures? Where and when you want them? Do you have focus? Do you have the right aperture? Do you have clean images? Are they spotted correctly? Are you using that Lightroom photo flow to really edit them appropriately? Is it completed on time, and is it well presented? Imagery, 20 points. So that's the aesthetics. Is it aesthetically a nice image? Does it have full white and full black and gradients in between? Is it a good use of color? Is it composed properly within that aspect ratio, within the square that you're looking through? Is it a nice image to look at? And concept. So the student has presented an original and unique finished product that demonstrates a level of thoughtfulness and concept provoking an emotional, intellectual, or psychological reaction. So again, think about this idea of memory, think about the technical considerations, and figure out for yourself what that means. How could you tie those together? How could those create some sort of story for your viewer? How could that be impactful? How is that something worth our time and energy to look at, to think about, to spend time with, and to maybe relate to? This is going to be due October 4th, so you have 1 week to complete this. It's not a ton of time, but at this point, I expect you through our workflow up to this point to have amassed all of the skills required to complete this project. So I think the technicals, if you've done everything up to this point, you have a good understanding. So now this week should really be spent on the conceptual part and really kind of completing and editing this project with some thoughtfulness. When you turn this in to Canvas, I would like not only your images, but I would like a brainstorming device. So I want to see you thinking about this idea of memory and this idea of fast and slow photography. So that could be in any way you create ideas. Is that a word cloud, if you've used those before? Is that an idea board, a mood board? Is it pulling research images that you find inspirational? Is it free writing? Do you journal? Do you like to write? Do you like to just make associated words? Is this mapping? Is this thumbnail sketches? Any way that you create this thoughtful ideation is what I want to see. So if that's in your sketchbook, snap a picture of it, you'll upload that. If that's something that you write on the computer or you're pulling images from different searches and things like that, save that in one document and you will upload that as your brainstorming device. It can be any device that is helpful to you. You will submit 8 final images, so those should be edited. You should go through that Lightroom workflow to edit those images, but they will be uploaded individually rather than as a composition like the common thread. You should have 4 fast images. So again, review what a fast image is. And you should have 4 slow images. Again, think about what slow images are. You should have 1 contact sheet, so you should know at this point how to make those contact sheets through Lightroom. Again, I want to see your process. I want to see what you're shooting, what you're thinking about as you're going through this. So I want to see all of your images. That's going to be one minimum 50 images, but if you shoot 300, give me all your contact sheets. I want to see all of what you're generating for this project. Even if you pick your 8 favorites, I want to see them all in the contact sheets. And additionally, you should have 1 paragraph explaining your concept. So how did you interpret this idea of memory and fast and slow? And you can submit that in the comment section of your Canvas assignment. So right after you've uploaded, it will say usually it's in the right-hand menu if you want to submit any comments. In that section, in that bubble, go ahead and write 1 paragraph of what you were thinking. Just tell me about your concept. What were you thinking? How do these images tie together? How did you respond to the theme? Okay, so that is it for that, but I also want to show you some examples. So I'll pop back over to the PowerPoint for you. And let's look at some photographers who like using fast and slow. Okay, so again, just a refresher, slow photographs are going to be low light and long exposure. So Ralph Eugene Meachard, I think we looked at one of his previously, but he's one of my favorite photographers because he's just a weirdo. Lots of kind of off-putting, uncomfortable, grotesque imagery, often dealing with children. And really, you can see this was a longer exposure, but he was capturing this sensation of movement. So this child was jumping out that window as he was taking that long exposure shot. So this child was static and this child was in movement. So you get that sensation of one being very blurred while the other one is very much in focus. This image was probably taken with a tripod. Okay, and again, the background obviously is very static. So this is in focus while this figure is in movement. It looks like this figure was turning as the photo was being shot, but very clever use of space. So we have this kind of balanced imagery of a white object kind of in one half of the picture plane and a white object in the other half, kind of balancing the image very well. Our focal points are the bright white objects. Everything else is darker, so a good use of contrast there. Okay, and this one here, again, kind of playing with that like sort of tongue-in-cheek, grotesque, playful, childlike imagery. He did a lot with these masks, so you would have children wear masks very often. So you can see this child is more static than this one. I think there's some movement in the arms there, which are being blurred because it's a longer exposure while movement is happening. And this figure is just wildly active, so we get this lovely sensation of seeing all of the movements of the hands and the hair and the head, because those are lighter objects on a darker background. So with that long exposure, it's recording all of that movement and all of that imagery. So I think this area is very particularly dynamic, but again, it's being grounded. It's an aesthetic image because we do get this sense of balance. There's an image on both sides of the picture plane, plus we get some interest in the middle, and we have some, this is sort of our grounding area, that's in focus, that's static, while we get these sort of obscure sections with that movement and with that abstraction. So it's a nice balance of chaos, but also grounded. Okay, and this one here, you can see relatively static figure, relatively static object, but then this object is in motion. So that creates a whole lot of conceptual ideation, you know, why is the American flag the one that it's obscured and moving? Why does this figure look so sad? Why is he holding this baby doll? Why is he in this environment that appears very chaotic and in a certain amount of disrepair? What is going on here? So our minds kind of start to create this story as if it were a scene in a movie, asking us all sorts of questions. But again, like a very well composed image. It's a central either bullseye or central composition. Our figures are very much in the middle. There's highlight and brightness in that figure while the background is very dark. There's some movement on the top and bottom of the picture plane, but nothing that's so distracting that it takes our eyes away from that focal point. All right, and again, using the sensation of masking child figures movement to create this sense of discomfort. This is a little bit more abstract. We know what's going on, but it has this movement and this blur that feels very uncomfortable and otherworldly. All right, Richard Misrach. So this is an Arizona photographer. This obviously was a night shoot. He actually went out into the Arizona desert, and there's a long exposure, but he's also integrated some light. So there's a light that you can kind of see is in the background, and it's shooting at this, oh gosh, is this an ironwood tree? I'm not a botanical expert. So it's shooting at this little plant life here, while we also get the setting sun, creating that silhouette of the mountainscape. So it's a really nice use of light and also very long exposure. So same thing here, you know that it is long exposure and a night shoot because we get that sensation of the stars moving across. So night photography and astral photography is pretty difficult because with long exposures, you get the movement of the stars as they go across the sky. If you want that, it's very beautiful. So Richard was looking at this and he wanted that sensation of time passing, right? So memory, time, it kind of all goes together. But that was embraced in this photograph. However, a lot of astrophotography has really pointed stars, and that is again just really knowing how to manipulate your aperture and your exposure to get enough light to create really vibrant stars. So this again has some lighting. You can kind of see some lighting happening coming from this direction. That is unnatural lighting, lighting up this cacti over here. And then we have the moonlight that's kind of casting a nice bright image in the center of the picture plane. So again, we have great balance. There's the horizon line that is almost bisecting very evenly this image. We have some clear focal points in the cactus and the moon, but we also have a really nice sense of environment going on throughout. So great example of slow photography here. And again, same thing here, but more towards probably a sunset time. Again, with some, this is all artificial light that's being introduced into the environment, but also a lot of natural lighting and silhouette happening here. The movement of the clouds tells me this was a long exposure. Okay, Joachim Frosch So this is an artist who really likes taking their time within a studio setting. So the other examples were either out in nature or more candid. Slow photography could also mean being slow and methodical in a studio environment. So this particular artist created these objects and sort of made this setting for them, thinking about time and decay, using a lot of sort of Dutch painting references with fruit and kind of food elements, and the idea of life and death as you would have in a lot of the Dutch still lives of the time. Sort of memento mori paintings. And this one is particularly interesting also because it's in a triptych. So triptych means 3 images that come together to create a whole. Really lovely sense of lighting there. All right, and this one here, so you can see that this is a triptych, but while the environment is changing. So he took one image here when the artichokes were facing one way, then another one here when it was facing the other way. And then that kind of blends towards the last one. So you get this kind of really shallowing, this compression of reality, time and reality, into one image that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. It looks like a reflection, but it also looks like it's going into the other. It's a really clever use of space here with the triptych. Again, a really slow image, so I know just based on the shadows, the deep shadows, that this was a long exposure, but because everything was still and static, that resulted in a really clear, sharp image with a lot of really nice, kind of luscious, deep shadows, dark blacks, but also a lot of vibrant highlights. And that is all due to this idea of a long exposure and static elements within that studio. Again, with fish, so again, kind of referencing that Dutch still life painting. All right, so artists who use fast photography, that is a medium to high lighting environment. They're short exposure time, so that's shutter speeds roughly higher than 1/60th of a second, and that's going to be really crisp, clear focus. So it's going to capture the environment in a split second, and you're going to get everything really crisp. So you'll probably want a deeper depth of focus so that as your objects are moving, you can capture that really crisply and nicely with that kind of deep sense, deep depth of field. All right, so this is Gary Winogrand, again, very famous, candid photographer, street photographer, very famous street photographer, one of the earliest American street photographers. Would just take his camera out wherever he was going, walking along the street. I think this was in the Hamptons, kind of shooting vacations in the Jersey, New York area. Okay, and he did this rapid fire thing. So he would take thousands and thousands and thousands of photos, and some of them just happened to really hit all of the points. So aesthetically, things that are happening here, we have this dark figural element. Again, this is almost in the center of the page, so we know this is our sense of focus. That is in crisp focus there, and that's a very dark element on a white background, so our eye goes immediately there. We know that that's the point of focus, but there's also other leading lines, leading elements in here that offer some interest. There's a lot of tonal elements, so we have deep blacks within this jacket, and kind of in this background here, we have bright, bright whites in the background sky area, and we have all of the range of grays in the surrounding elements. It is a very fast exposure because this person is in motion, he's flying through the air, but it's relatively in focus, so we know that it was captured very, very quickly. This was outside, which is the brightest of the lighting environments, so if you need a high lighting environment, I recommend middle of the day. It's very, very bright, especially here in Arizona. So same thing, this was, I believe, in New York on a ferry. So you can see He did not dictate where these people were standing. It just so happened that we have this couple here in the middle, and they are right in the center of the picture plane. Those are our focal points. We look to them first, and then all of these other people are serving as additional compositional elements, kind of framing this, adding some dynamic visual elements, some dynamic visual eye movement that we can kind of go through. We're very interested in them. They offer a lot of interest, but we know that these people here are our focal point. They're in the center of the picture plane. They have bright whites and deep blacks, and we see them very, very clearly there. Sally Mann, another famous photographer, one of my favorites here. So Sally Mann took a lot of pictures of her family as they were growing up. Very controversial nowadays because it dealt with a lot of nudity. She used her children as subjects very often. So I think now it's kind of thrust into the spotlight of ethics. At the time, it wasn't questioned quite as much, but arguably very masterful technical photographs. So again, deep blacks and bright whites, really compositionally sound. Our figure is the focal point. It's in the center of the image, and the surrounding elements offer interest, but they don't detract from our focal point. This is an image, and there's also, this is a figure, and there's also water. Anytime there's water, it's easy to tell whether this was a fast or a slow exposure, because if it's very fast, we see each and every ripple. If it's slow, it kind of all blurs together. So this was probably on the faster side, which it's outside, it's in natural lighting, that makes sense. Okay, another one of Sally Mann. This is her son. Again, in the center of the picture plane, offering some nice focal points here, but also framing that within this almost circular framing device. But with our focal point, our eye kind of goes towards this bright spot and then leads our eye into this figure here. Very much in focus. We can see each ripple in the water, so I know that this was a fast exposure. All right, and also this one here. I do believe that this was the father, although I'm not sure on that. And then one of the daughters lying in the bed after she has just bit him. So that kind of bite mark is one of our focal points. Also, a lot of highlights happening in that facial expression, a lot of dynamic facial expressions. So we're left to kind of wonder what is happening in this scene. It looks like she was in some sort of costume. We're having some playtime, but she's very, very clearly mad or contemplative or thoughtful here. And there's this bite mark. So is this just an expression of anger? What was happening here? But a very dynamic image with, again, these bright whites and deep shadows, offering a really rich photograph. All right, Ansel Adams. Again, we've talked about him a handful of times. A lot of outdoor shooting. Again, the sensation of balance. So we're given this grounding device. The horizon line is roughly at a third of the picture plane. We have bright whites. We have deep blacks. We have this movement kind of leading our eye down with the strata of this rock going into what I think is a glacier or some frozen elements on a lake. There. Really kind of soft and poetic. There's not a focal point, but there is really clear movement along this photograph. Ansel Adams did take things very quickly. So all of this imagery right here is water in motion, but he has taken a very fast exposure, so it's captured it as it's fairly static. We also know that Ansel Adams took a lot of pictures of clouds, different water elements, different natural environments, and all of those need to be taken very quickly with short exposure times so that you do capture them in very crisp focus and crisp detail. All right, and that is all the examples that I have for you. So that was a combination of artists who use slow photography and artists who use fast photography. Again, I will challenge you to combine the concept of your fast and your slow. What can each of those bring to your overall concept? So it will take some brainstorming and some thought process to think about, okay, how do I use fast and how do I use slow photography, and how do I marry them together in terms of memory while really being thoughtful in my concept? How can I create the best story and the best viewer experience? Again, memory could mean a different thing to each and every person who is in this course, but that's great. Go down those rabbit holes, figure out what it means to you, and tell the story that is personal to you or contemplative towards your concept, whether that's theoretical about psychology, about the idea of photography itself, about documentation, or about something personal to your history. Could be any one of those. I will challenge you to be thoughtful. Give me that brainstorming device. Remember to save all of your photographs and put them in a contact sheet, but what you will be turning into me in your final are 4 fast images and 4 slow images. And that is it.